Well, the state has called the 11th witness in the trial of Televangelist Timothy Omotoso and his two co-accused Lusanda, Sulani and Zukiswa, Sitho. Karen Muller is one of two psychologists who interviewed some of Omotoso's alleged victims. She testified about how most of the girls were lured into alleged sexual acts with Omotoso. She's the third witness to take the stand since the trial resumed in the High Court in Gqeberha this week. Our SABC News reporter Lerato Fekisi has more there.
We are still at the Port Elizabeth High Court, where the 11th witness in the case of rape accused Pastor Timothy Omotoso and his two co-accused, Karen Muller, a psychologist who has interviewed some of the alleged victims in the Omotoso case, took the stand this afternoon just after tea. She was having her cross-examination by defense lawyer Peter Dobenen, who was really focusing on the issue of consent. He opened his arguments by asking Muller, can she agree that the victims were not forced into the room where they alleged that Pastor Omotoso did sexual acts on them, and they in fact volunteered themselves into the room and they consented to the room, and that's how they landed up in there. Muller then replied that it would be incorrect to say that the victims agreed or consented to go into the room, but instead, because they saw Omotoso as a father-like figure, because they feared, revered, reverenced him as someone second in command to God, they went inside that room where alleged sexual offences happened against them because they were scared, because they were forced, because inside that house they had no choices. Everything was, you do what he says or you are going to face the consequences of that. So she really argued against Doberman's alleged assertion that the victims consented to going inside their room, they wanted to go inside their room, but argued against that, saying that they went inside their room because, number one, they were young teenagers, naive, from various backgrounds. Many of them had no father figures. So in him, Pastor Omotoso, they saw someone they could trust, they could love, they could find comfort in, who did the same for them at times. And then they went inside the room because they were promised a better life. If, for instance, they massaged his feet, if for instance he prayed for them or touched their heads, they would get the better life they had wanted for them and their families. So the cross-examination between defense lawyer Peter Dobenen and Karen Muller, who's a psychologist in this case, was pretty much just going back and forth about understanding or coming to terms about stating that the girls got into the room out of fear and out of being forced, not really because they consented to what had been asked of them to go inside the room. They ended off their arguments with Doberman asking Muller if all the evidence that she has is pretty much, it's only based on what the victims had told her and nothing that she had observed as an expert. And she closed off her argument by stating that all the evidence that she has presented to the court, all the evidence that she has brought forward before the court, is all evidence that she got from the girls during the interviews and nothing she has observed as an expert within the psychological field. It's now adjourned, and after the lunch break we'll carry on with more testimony from Karen Muller, who's a psychologist who has interviewed all the alleged victims in the Pastor Timothy Omotoso case.